This video is brought to you by Squarespace. Whether it's your new profession or just a lifelong passion, start your journey to website glory with Squarespace. Check out their amazing all-in-one platform through the link in the description below. More on them in a bit. This is a story about space travel, Cold War espionage, and a Soviet shuttle that looked remarkably similar to what NASA produced. Maybe it was just an extraordinary coincidence, and maybe the Soviet Union was a deeply misunderstood socialist state that cared profoundly about its people and didn't cause millions of deaths over its 69-year history. Maybe. We're not going to tell you what to believe, but this tale has a lot more to it than meets the eye. The Soviet Buran spacecraft, the only reusable spacecraft to ever appear out of the Soviet Union, looked about as identical to the NASA Space Shuttle as you could possibly get. They both shared the same kind of design. They were both black and white, and they both shared roughly the same kind of mission profile, getting things into space and then bringing them back down again. Put them side by side, and you'd see some minor differences, but in a blind tasting, or a blind shuttle picking game, if you will, surely only the most eagle-eyed would be able to tell one from the other. So, was the Buran spacecraft one giant Soviet ripoff? Well, what kind of mega projects video would this be if we didn't leave you on tenterhooks for just the time being? You may already have a stance on this subject if you know the background, but this may well be colored by political and national ideology. The Buran, which means snowstorm or blizzard in Russian, arrived just as the Soviet Union was beginning to unravel and came with plenty of propaganda trumpeted from both sides. So, how unique and good was this Soviet space shuttle? Well, let's take a look. Before we do, I'll just mention, just because random plug for something completely random, the show on Apple TV, For All Mankind, they feature this space shuttle and stuff. It's so cool. It's such a good show. Just go watch that. No, I'm kidding. Please watch this video and then watch that. If the collapse of the Soviet Union isn't your particular forte, well, lucky for you, we recently done a video all about it. The dissolution of the USSR, that is. So, if you want to learn more about that, check out that video after this one, and after watching the entirety of For All Mankind, I suppose. But in a nutshell, the Soviet Union's attempts at keeping up with the US between the mid-1960s and the mid-1980s caused the USSR all kinds of problems. While the nuclear weapons program and space program received bountiful budgets, the standard of living across the state stagnated, then began to decline. In the hopelessly out-of-touch words of Marie Antoinette,
let them eat cake.
Or, as would probably have been the case in the Soviet Union, let them eat Black Sea caviar. While lines for basic commodities began growing in the Soviet Union, its leaders knew that they had to keep up with the Joneses, or at least appear to be able to match the US in whatever they were doing. The problem was that the US economy was absolutely thundering along and had grown to twice the size of their superpower rivals. The Americans were throwing money around like there was no tomorrow, but at least they could afford to. In 1981, the space race went up a gear with the appearance of NASA's Space Shuttle, another topic we've already covered here on Mega Projects in case you're interested. You probably are. This video is pretty similar. In fact, you've probably seen that previous one. If you have, thank you. On April the 12th, 1981, the world watched as the Space Shuttle Columbia blasted off from the Kennedy Launch Center to become the first reusable spacecraft into space. While this certainly was a historic occasion, I'm willing to bet that the Soviet authorities didn't quite share in that enthusiasm. In truth, the Soviet space program had been slipping further and further behind the Americans since the heavy days of Sputnik and Yuri Gagarin. When information regarding the American space shuttle program reached Soviet leaders, either through the media or KGB activities, it was met with irritation and plenty of suspicions. What exactly were the Americans going to do with a reusable spacecraft that could carry 30 tons of equipment up into space at a rate of 50 times per year? Now, we know that the space shuttles never got anywhere near that kind of frequency, but that was the original plan, or at least what people in Moscow were paranoid about. With social problems ballooning across the Soviet Union, its leaders thought it was best to feed its citizens before amping up the space race to levels that they had little hope of maintaining. Just joking, of course the USSR prioritized upping the space program, and it implemented the most extensive and expensive project in the history of Soviet space exploration, which became the Buran program. Alright, let's begin with what the Soviet authorities envisioned with the Buran program. As I mentioned, this was started as a way of keeping up with the Americans and their space shuttles, which the USSR were sure would sooner or later be used to carry nuclear weapons up into space and then be used to destroy the USSR from above. Just to be clear, as far as we know, NASA space shuttles were never designed to carry weapons and never did, but the Soviet Union was certainly paranoid that that was the case. With that in mind, while the Buran program was vaguely disguised as a civilian vehicle, its distant goals were almost certainly military. Russian cosmonaut Oleg Kotov later told New Scientist magazine, "We had no civilian tasks for Buran, and the military ones were no longer needed. It was originally designed as a military system for weapon delivery, maybe even nuclear weapons." Development of the Buran program began in the 1970s, in parallel, or rather just slightly behind, the US space shuttle. This was a rocky time in the Soviet Union. It's fair to say that not everybody thought the massive outlay of money was what was best for the USSR. But it appeared as if hardline military hotheads managed to convince Soviet leader Leonid Brezhnev that once the US shuttles were finished, it was only going to be a matter of time before they began attacking Moscow. In February 1976, a secretive decree was signed, and the Buran program, along with the Energia rockets that would carry them up, formally came into being. Now, if you're ready for your dream website to finally appear, then it's time to visit our friends over at Squarespace. We've still got a few minutes of summer left, which means you guys are still laying around the pool in the park daydreaming about what that next project you want to start is. Fortunately, Squarespace gives you every possible tool you might want to fashion your next project. Whether it's a small business, a sports blog, a creative portfolio, or just a page at the dankest of means, it does not matter. If you can dream it, you can build it with Squarespace. Are you looking to get in and out quick without thinking too much about what your website should look like? Bam! Use one of their quick, beautiful templates to make a website that's fresh and for you. Or maybe you're more of a hands-on person. You've got lots of opinions and ideas about exactly what your site should look like, while Squarespace gives you all the customization options you could ever want. And once you're done setting up your website, tinkering with the design if you're so inclined, or maybe just playing around with the colors, there are so many extra features that Squarespace provides so that your website can thrive. Email campaigns, patronage portals, social integrations, member-only areas, analytics, commercial options, 24/7 customer support. Everything you need is in one place. So when you're ready to get started on the next project of yours, big or small, if it involves a website, it's got to be with Squarespace. Right now, you can go to squarespace.com for a free trial, and when you're ready to launch your new site, go to squarespace.com/megaprojects, and you'll save 10% off your first purchase of a website or a domain. And now, let's get back to that space shuttle, comrades. So this brings us to the remarkably similar design that the Buran spacecraft shared with its Yankee rival. Did the KGB perform one of the 20th century's greatest rip-offs? Well, yes and no. As I'll come to later in today's video, there are certainly enough differences between the Buran and the space shuttle, but most of these are inside. So what about the outer design? The Soviet Union almost certainly had detailed plans of how the space shuttle was being designed. I mean, this was the Cold War after all. But where they certainly had a leg up was by essentially hacking into internal databases at universities and facilities across the United States which were researching potential space shuttle designs. These included Caltech, MIT, Brooklyn Poly, Princeton, Stanford, Kansas, Penn State, and Ohio State. The Soviet military-industrial complex, the VPK, basically harvested all of the background work that the Americans had done in the build-up to their final space shuttle design, so case closed, I hear you cry. However, between 1974 and 1980, these ideas were pored over by Soviet scientists and engineers who began running their own tests, and after extensive wind tunnel testing, they found that the Americans had indeed designed the optimal shape for a reusable space vehicle. The word is that the engineers loathed the idea of building the Buran with the same kind of design as the space shuttle, but they had little choice. Either you went with the same outer design, or you just built something worse. Construction officially began on the Buran prototype in 1980, and 4 years later, the first Soviet space shuttle finally appeared. As we've already established, the Buran shares plenty of external characteristics with the American space shuttle, but certainly has plenty of uniqueness to make it its own spacecraft. At 36.37 meters in length, it was 20 meters shorter than the space shuttle. Both shared a delta wing design, but the Buran was again smaller than the shuttle with a wingspan of 23.92 meters, just over 10 meters less than NASA's vehicle. In terms of weight, the space shuttle was significantly heavier at 82.5 tons compared to the Buran's 62 tons. So that's a pretty noticeable amount amount, which brings us nicely to one of the major differences between the two reusable spacecraft. While the Space Shuttle's 3 engines were located within the shuttle itself, the Buran's 4 engines could be found on a separate rocket stage, the Energia rocket, which the Buran would straddle during takeoff. This section wasn't reusable, which meant that the Energia rocket would detach after takeoff, but included its own guidance, navigation, and control system. While the Space Shuttle used 2 boosters with solid propellant, the Energia rocket had 4 liquid-propelled boosters, and this was one area where the Soviet Union was generally considered to be superior. The Energia rocket didn't have the same kind of segments and O-rings that caused the Challenger disaster, nor did it use foam, which was partially responsible for the Columbia disaster. Now, since the Buran program didn't get very far, it's impossible to say for sure that it wouldn't have had its own issues, but, well, those are just the facts that we have. The exterior of the Buran came with 38,600 heat-shielding tiles designed to withstand 100 re-entries, similar to what was included on the shuttle. Inside, the cabin consisted of 3 decks. The command module, located on the upper deck, housed the workspace for the crew and served to accommodate the commander, pilot, engineer, and mission specialist seats. Below that, the mid-deck had the life support, auxiliary equipment, and enough room to seat 6 crew members during launch and re-entry. Finally, the lower deck was where the power systems were located. The Buran had a spherical compartment docking system with a diameter of 2.67 meters and a cylindrical tunnel leading to the androgynous peripheral docking unit, similar to the one on the shuttle, but could be extended further than the American version. Both the Buran and the shuttles used hydrogen fuel cells to produce electricity and burned hydrazine to power onboard hydraulic systems. Another key difference between the two, and the one that gave the Buran a definite edge, was that it was designed for both piloted and fully autonomous flight, whereas the shuttle needed to be piloted at all times. The Space Shuttle was later fitted with automated landing capability, but this came long after the Buran had faded into obscurity. So yeah, these 2 rocket spacecraft do look curiously alike from the outside, but they had so many differences that it's really impossible to just simply call the Buran a NASA ripoff. In retrospect, we know that the Buran only flew into space once, but at the time, certainly everybody involved must have thought it was to be the first of many. Between November 1985 and April 1988, a full-scale Buran mock-up with 4 turbofan engines took part in no less than 24 atmospheric flights as testing progressed. As far as we can tell, things went relatively smoothly, and as the end of 1988 neared, the Soviets readied themselves for the Buran's maiden flight into space. This would be an unmanned flight departing from the Baikonur Cosmodrome in what is present-day Kazakhstan. On the 15th of December 1988, after an aborted takeoff due to a mechanical failure, the engines on the Energia rocket roared into life. If there had been any issues in the build-up, the flight itself went entirely as planned, with the mighty rocket detaching shortly after liftoff before the Buran orbited the Earth twice, traveling 83,707 kilometers in 3 hours and 25 minutes. After successfully re-entering the atmosphere, the Buran came in for its first landing as heavy crosswinds began battering the spacecraft. No doubt those on the ground held their breath as the Virgin spacecraft faced its first major challenge. But again, it performed exactly as it had been designed to do. The automated system on board calculated the risk and quickly aborted the landing before bringing the Buran around for a second attempt, which saw the spacecraft touch down just 10 meters from its designated targeted landing spot. It became the first spacecraft to perform an unmanned flight, and that included landing in fully automatic mode. The Buran's first flight had become a huge success, and further flights were soon planned. The Petichka 1.02 mission was slated for sometime in 1991, with the second also in the same year. The first manned flight was scheduled for 1994, with a further 4 planned across 1994 and 1995. It appeared the stage was set for the age of Buran to commence, but as we now know, momentous change was afoot. With the Soviet Union imploding, it seems the last thing on anybody's mind was a costly space program, and sadly, the Buran never flew again. While the program was only officially suspended to begin with, the economic downturn which followed the dissolution of the USSR at the end of 1991 was a hammer blow, and in 1993, Russian President Boris Yeltsin formally cancelled the program. The enormous project spanned just shy of 20 years and cost the Soviet Union around 20 billion rubles, which worked out to about $34 billion back then and roughly $76 billion today, which makes that single figure not only the most expensive of all time, but a figure that is going to be really hard to ever eclipse. Things got even worse for the Buran when in 2003 the roof of the hangar it was housed in at the Baikonur Cosmodrome collapsed, killing 8 people inside and destroying the very Buran that had once left our planet. The tale of the ill-fated and ill-timed spacecraft built to compete with the Space Shuttle had finally come to its tragic end. Compared to the stellar, well, mostly anyway, career of the US space shuttles, the Buran had a most inauspicious life and a sad death. Its legacy's complex. Some vehemently label it a flagrant ripoff, and there's certainly plenty to back up that claim, but we need to place some boundaries on those accusations. Yeah, the Soviets hacked into US databases and harvested technical data on an almost WikiLeaks-style level, which no doubt saved them billions in the process, but you can't base your entire judgment of the Buran space shuttle on just this. The space shuttle and the Buran look almost identical because they were designed to primarily do the exact same thing. In terms of aerodynamics, this is the design for a reusable spacecraft. Had the Soviets not gathered up all the American research and actually did the hard work themselves, the designs would have probably come out fairly similar. Now, those people who can't get past the external similarities are probably not gonna like what we say next, because there are strong arguments that several aspects of the Buran were actually superior to the space shuttle, not least its automated system and boosters. As I said earlier, it's impossible to fully compare the two because the space shuttles flew 135 missions and the Buran flew just one. But to blindly call it a ripoff does disservice to an excellent piece of engineering that unfortunately was just born at the wrong time. So I really hope you found that video interesting. If you did, please do smash that like button below. Don't forget to subscribe, and as always, thank you for watching.